All right. Well, hey, welcome. Welcome to Restoration City. Welcome to DC on a holiday weekend. I love those of us that are still here, and I love those of you that are joining us online. Really excited for what we're going to experience together. Really excited, really grateful for what we have already experienced. Kind of a weekend to just enjoy the stripped down simplicity of the gospel, to celebrate the things that define our community and the things that Jesus really calls to shape and form our lives. Can't wait to talk about the passage that Elliot just read for us, but I want to give you a way to kind of frame why this passage matters to us today. Right, I think we would all agree that we live in a world that is increasingly characterized by what I would call relational fragility, right? I mean, like, we experience this in so many different ways, but we've all been there where you have been involved in what you thought was a meaningful relationship. And I'm not just talking like dating or something like that, but like, meaningful connection with a friend or a coworker or a roommate or somebody in your small group, somebody in the church, whatever. And then all of a sudden that relationship that you thought had some traction, it hits a little bump in the road and it feels like the thing just shatters overnight. Or at the very least, there's like irreparable damage done to the relationship, right? When you think about relationships shattering, we all would do well to take a minute to think about the reality that our culture had to invent the term ghosting. Like, that's messed up. We didn't need that word 10 years ago. 10 years ago, that sounded like a weird Halloween thing. Today, you're like, ghosting. Oh, right. I know what that means. That is that experience in life where all of a sudden somebody just drops out, right? They don't just stop hanging out with you. They also stop answering your phone calls, returning your phone calls, replying to your text, even though they forgot to turn off the read receipt. So you know that they've read the thing and they're just like rubbing in your face that they're not going to write back. They block you on social, which is a junior high level move that we're fully capable of doing as adults. They leave the church. They just essentially crop you out of their life with little or no explanation. Right? Probably all of us have experienced some version of that. And if you have, I'm sorry, because you know that it is not only one of the most cowardly, but also one of the most hurtful forms of rejection that we are capable of. Right? And if you're tempted to ghost somebody because you're convinced that's the God-honoring way to handle it, I would love to encourage you to handle it in a very, very different way. Right? And it should alarm all of us that we are creating a society that enables ghosting, right? The reason we didn't need that word years ago wasn't that people weren't capable of doing hurtful things. It was just that even if you're trying to cut somebody out of your life, you still ended up running into them at church or your kid's Little League game or the grocery store or the neighborhood park. But now we live in a day and age where you really can cut the cord to relationship, via your phone, and you really don't have to deal with that person ever again. Right? So we know what it looks like for relationships to shatter. We also know what it looks like, even if it doesn't shatter, to just see the relationship weather kind of perpetual erosion that comes through unaddressed hurt and unresolved conflict. Right? There's just this sense of relational fragility. Imagine for a minute how much richer our lives would be if we could create a community, if we could create a web of relationships for ourselves that rather than being characterized by relational fragility, it was a community that was characterized by relational resilience, right? The kind of friendships or the kind of approach to your marriage, the kind of approach to church that says, hey, look, I know that at some point there are going to be bumps in the road in this relationship. It's inevitable, but when those bumps come, not only are we going to get over them, but we're somehow going to come out of the experience stronger than we went into it, right? That we would develop the ability to create gritty relationships with one another that, yes, have been through some stuff, but have only caused us to love and value each other more. Right now, this is the kind of thing that we all need to figure out if you're going to have a healthy marriage. Right? You got to figure this one out if you want to have healthy friendships. Right? You got to figure this out if you want to have a healthy relationship with your family of origin. And I would argue you got to figure this one out if you want to have a healthy relationship with a local church. Now, here's what's interesting. All of this is not just, relationship 101 and 3 tips to having more meaningful friendships. It actually turns out that this idea of relational resilience is kind of central to Jesus' vision of life in the kingdom of heaven, right? That this matters to our Lord and Savior, right? If we want to move from relational fragility to relational resilience, we need to learn how to do the thing Jesus instructs us to do in this passage. Look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 24 with me, where Jesus says very simply that we are to be reconciled to your brother or sister. That verb reconciled in the Greek is an imperative. It's a command. Jesus is not offering this to us for our consideration. He's not saying, hey, you might want to think about it. Hey, maybe you should pray about. He's like, no, look, I already prayed about it on your behalf. It's pre-prayed. You should figure out how to be reconciled with your brother or sister, right? Author and psychiatrist Kurt Thompson, instead of talking about reconciling relationships, he will talk about repairing relational ruptures. That's kind of a helpful picture for me where you think, okay, something happened, the relationship kind of explodes, and I got to get to work fixing that. Sometimes the language I use is just talk about fixing broken relationships, being reconciled. It's all different ways of saying the same thing. And most of us, when we talk about relational reconciliation or fixing broken relationships, we instinctively see the applicability of this in our lives, right? Because you already think about some relationships that if they're not broken, they're on the fence, they're a little shaky right now, they could use a little rupture repair, right? We see the need for this. We just find it really hard to do. Which is why we are going to spend as much time today talking about how the gospel makes all of this possible as we are going to spend talking about what it is that Jesus is actually telling us to do. So if it's okay with you, we're going to actually look at this passage that Elliot read for us, but kind of do 2 different laps around the text. We're going to do an initial kind of once over just to get the overall vision and heart of what Jesus is saying. And then we're going to come back and we're going to get really, really specific in the way we apply it. So if you're looking for kind of the overall summation of what Jesus is saying in this section of the Sermon on the Mount, got to realize that he is calling us to relational reconciliation, to fixing broken relationships in a world that is characterized by relational disintegration. Right? Got to remember that the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' instruction to us as his followers of what it looks like to live under the rule and reign of God. He is trying to paint a picture of what it actually looks like to say that you are a follower of Jesus and then live that out, right? He's trying to paint a picture of what it looks like to live in the kingdom of heaven, right? And we've talked about this for a couple of weeks. The Gospel of Matthew is laden with kingdom language, and here in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is trying to paint a picture of life in that kingdom. In this section of the Sermon on the Mount, we're going to kind of start it this week and then spend the next couple of weeks moving through this section. Jesus is going to get really specific. He's going to take this idea of the rule and reign of God, which could be sort of a 35,000-foot concept, and he's going to press it right down into street level. He's like, let's talk about anger. Let's talk about sex, divorce, honesty, justice, how we treat our enemies, right? Areas that we all struggle with or are tempted by, places that our society is wrestling, and Jesus is like, no, I want to take the guesswork out of this, and I'd like to tell you my heart for your life. And in the course of doing that, he starts Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 by saying, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. In some ways, it looks like Jesus is being sort of shockingly casual here. It's like, you've heard, to which most people would be like, yeah, I've heard. Like in the 10 Commandments. This wasn't just like, fortune cookie morality, like you wrote it down on a tablet of stone. Like these are one of the 10 laws that have shaped the life of the nation of Israel. This is one of the 10 principles that have shaped the moral and ethical life of the people of God ever since Moses went up the mountain. Yeah, I've heard of that one. Right? Jesus isn't trying to be flip about it. If anything, he's probably reflecting the fact that most people he was talking to were illiterate. It was still an oral society, so they had not read it in their Bible. They had heard it in Sunday school. Right? They'd heard it in temple. They'd heard it from their rabbi. But there is also a way where Jesus is not trying to be dismissive, but he is trying to be just a tiny bit provocative, because he's kind of saying, hey, look, not only have you heard this, not only do you know where it comes from, but let's be honest, there's nothing all that special about this commandment. Right? There's nothing all that shocking about thou shalt not murder. Right? He's kind of like, of course you've heard this. And of course it's really, really important, but also kind of not that big a deal. Like this wasn't designed to get everybody's jaw to drop. This is not the jaw-dropping moment of the sermon where they're like, wait a minute. You are saying murder is bad? Whew, back up and defend that. They're like, well, yeah, right. And Jesus is like, yeah, right. Everybody kind of agrees to that. And you all know that if you were to take that step of taking the life of another human being, you would be subject to, here's the key part, you would be subject to civil judgment. You'd go to court. You would be prosecuted. By the way, in his day and age, both the civil law of Israel and the Torah and the civil law of the Roman Empire were very clear about the penalty for somebody convicted of murder. Leviticus 24:17. If a man kills anyone, he must be put to death. And Jesus is saying, okay, you understand this. Thou shalt not murder. And if you do, you are either going to go to jail for a really long time, or you might be subject to the death penalty. He's like, great, you got that. But if you're trying to figure out what it looks like to live under the rule and reign of God, there must be something more than that for us as the people of God. Right? If we are, going back a couple of weeks ago, meant to live as a city on a hill, if we are truly meant to be light for the world, we have to aspire to far much more than thou shalt not murder or you're going to go to jail. Right? We all kind of get that, and Jesus is like, well, good, I'm glad you get it. Let me show you where I'm going with that. Verse 22, but I tell you, remember we talked about that last week? This is a little phrase he has where he is positioning himself as one who has not only all authority over heaven and earth, but one who has authority over the law as if he was the one who wrote the law in the first place. He's like, here's what I tell you. Everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court. Whoever says, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. In verse 22, he has shifted from civil judgment to divine judgment. That's the key to understanding what's going on here. Essentially, he is saying that God is as concerned about the condition of our hearts as the law is about the action of our hands. Jesus is saying that he wants us to engage with the anger that brews inside each one of our souls and causes us to lash out at other people made in the image of God. Whether you lash out with your words, your fists, your tweets, or you lash out by just cutting someone out of your life. That thing inside of us that boils over to the point where we harm another image bearer. Jesus says, I want you to stop giving yourself so much credit for the fact that you haven't said it, for the fact that you haven't punched him yet, for the fact that you wrote it on Twitter and then just deleted it. For the fact that you haven't sent the email, don't give yourself so much credit. Yes, it's good that you didn't say it. Yes, it's good that you didn't take the swing. Yes, it's good that you didn't send the email. Yes, it's good that you didn't tweet it. But he's like, can we talk about the fact that your heart savored that moment of anger? Can we talk about the joy that you have found in going back to that conversation over and over and over again to fantasize about all of the hateful things you wished you had said? Can we talk about the fact that you're still replaying that one 3 weeks later and you're like, oh man, I could take his head off now? Can we go there? And all of a sudden we realize that Jesus is up to something really significant. He wants us to have the courage to engage the reality of our souls because he knows, by the way, that relational reconciliation, he knows that relational rigidity, he knows that loving other people requires us to have the courage to deal with all of the junk that's inside all of our hearts. Right? He says you're going to have to get comfortable dealing with your anger. You're going to have to deal with your pride. And those are going to be the two issues that we're going to be up against all morning as we work through the text. The anger that boils inside of us and the pride that fuels it. He says, look, but if you can do that, if you can somehow, because you understand the grace of the gospel, begin to deal with anger and pride, you can start to move down a path of reconciliation. You can start to do the work of fixing broken relationships. Right? So that's the overall idea, but let's go back and be a little bit more specific. Let's talk about how this passage applies to us when we know that we have been wronged. Right? That's the heart of verse 22. We're going to put it back up on the screen. Jesus here is not impugning the fact, he's not questioning whether the person in verse 22 has actually been wronged. He's almost assuming that there is some kind of legitimate grievance. By the way, the words that you see here in your English New Testament, that are translated as whoever insults his brother, whoever says you fool, those were not like, Bible time, major curse words of like, oh, no. This is more like just kind of street level, kind of like our culture calling somebody an idiot or a jerk or something like that. Kind of nothing really exciting about the words he uses here. It's very, very kind of commonplace anger, but he's assuming in verse 22 that something has happened in your life that has made you angry, right? By the way, in verse 22, he shifts from talking to you, plural, to you as an individual. He wants us to wrestle with this one in the context of our own lives. But in order to wrestle with it in the context of our own lives, we've got to back up for just a minute and make sure that we all have an appropriate kind of theology of anger, an appropriate understanding of anger, because there is like this stream in evangelical Christianity that just says, look, all forms of anger are wrong. All forms of anger are bad. Anger is like lust. When it pops up in your heart, you just need to crush that sucker down. Don't you dare be angry. If you are angry, you are sinning. You need to stop that. And that does not in any way fit with the teaching of Jesus or the overall arc of either the Old or the New Testament, right? The Apostle Paul says very clearly, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, be angry and do not sin. That anger in and of itself is not necessarily sinful. It's what we choose to do with it, right? This is where you can think about Jesus making a whip and driving money changers out of the temple. Right? Saying, you're not going to turn my Father's house into a den for robbers. This is designed to be a house of prayer for people of all nations. Right? So there's a part of me that is very aware that we're teaching this text on a week where not only do I suspect you have been angry, we're doing this on a week where I hope you have been angry. Look, if 21 dead people in an elementary school doesn't make you angry, don't give Jesus credit for that. That's a problem, not something to celebrate. That's supposed to make you angry. That should bother you. Remember, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Right? The shooting in the grocery store in Buffalo should make you angry. Our church is affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention, and the leadership of the SBC released a report earlier this week that detailed the failing of some of our denominational leaders to appropriately protect people who were the victims of sexual assault in churches. Makes me angry. There are people who had the ability to prevent abuse and they didn't do it. That should make you angry. Right? Chip Dodd is a pastor, counselor, theologian in Tennessee who really has helped a lot of people understand that anger in its best form just reveals the things that we're passionate about. Right? Getting angry about a school shooting means that you're passionate about little kids being able to go learn and not being afraid that they won't come home and see mom and dad at the end of the day. And I would suggest we should all be passionate about that. Right? When you get angry at a grocery store shooting in Buffalo, it suggests that there's a passion in you that says, look, nobody should be the target of violence just because of the color of their skin. And there's a lot of other things that we get angry about in our world, and we should, because it reveals our passion. It reveals not that we're opposing the will of God, but we're embracing God's view of life. So anger in and of itself is not the problem. It's the kind of anger that makes us lash out at other people made in the image of God, to lash out with words, fists, tweets, or our absence. Right? So you got to have that framework. Right? It probably also needs to be said that I'm going to push a little bit today because I think there are a lot of us who prefer the comfort of bitterness and anger to doing the hard work of what Jesus is going to call us to do in a minute. Right? There's a lot of us that have just become complacent with sort of a low-level relational anger. And I want to push us a little bit. I want to push because this is one of the perpetual struggles in my life. Like, no joke, I grew up in a family. If you were to go to my parents' kitchen right now, they have a magnet on their refrigerator that proudly declares Irish Alzheimer's is forgetting everything but the grudge. And I walk by it every time I'm there. I'm like, I don't think that's good. But it's just there on a refrigerator magnet. I remember taking Laura home for the first time and pointing this out and being like, hey, this is vaguely concerning, but it's also going to explain a lot. Enjoy dinner. Come on over here, right? I mean, it's like the Cliff Notes version to what's about to go, right? It's not something that my family was good at, right? It's something I've struggled with. So I'm going to push a little bit. But you also have to push in a way that's sensitive to the fact that when I say being wronged, some of us are thinking about the guy that cut you off on 395 yesterday. And some of us are thinking about the person that abused you years ago or more recently. And I don't want to suggest that every form of being wronged is equal. And I don't want to suggest that every form of being wronged is equally easy to forgive. In fact, I would say the more traumatic the wrong, the more you need to allow myself or John Michael, or one of the other pastors at this church, a counselor, to walk this journey with you. Right? So I want to be really, really sensitive to that, even while I call us to deal with the anger that's in our heart so that we can move to what Jesus calls us to do, which is to embrace a radical forgiveness. Right, this is where we're going to jump over to Matthew 18 for a little bit. Matthew 18 is another place where Jesus is describing the kingdom of heaven. It's also another place where he's talking about forgiveness, what to do when you've been wronged, and he's talking about repaying relational debt. And he tells the story of a ruler who had a subject who owed him a massive amount of money, right? The Bible says it's 10,000 talents. And this person gets called in to settle up accounts, which is an exercise in absurdity because 10,000 talents in today's money, people write blogs about this like every 2 weeks, and now with inflation you can write one every day of being like, ooh, let's put that into today's money. It's between about $3 and $7 billion. Like everybody kind of agrees with that. And beyond that, it's not a fight about, theology. It's a fight about economics and stuff like that. But the point is, it's billions of dollars. Jesus is picking an absurdly high amount of money. He doesn't want to hear any discussion of like, well, how did this person get in that much debt? And why did they keep lending him money? And maybe it was like maybe it's just like medical bills because they had a sick child. He's like, no, they owe billions of dollars. This is absurd. And the debtor comes in and he says, hey, look, I just need some more time. Right? We should make all of us laugh. If you owed $3 billion and you're like, oh, what do you need, like an extra 6 months? Sure, we'll be happy to defer student loans for a while. Like, no, you owe $3 billion. 6 months doesn't do anything for you. Can I just have more time? But his master says, not only do you not get more time, I'm just going to forgive it. I'm going to wipe the debt clean. And he goes out and he finds somebody who owes him 100 denarii. This one's a little bit easier to peg, give or take 11 grand. He just got forgiven $3 billion. And he owes 11 grand. This guy owes him 11 grand. And he says to this servant, no, you're going to have to pay me back. You're going to have to pay back every dime, right? Verse 32, then after he had summoned him, his master said to him, you wicked servant. Right? The master has now heard about what happened. I forgave you $3 billion and you had somebody thrown in jail for $11,000. Master summoned him and said, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you also have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And because he was angry, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay everything that he owed. So also my heavenly Father will do to you unless every one of you forgives his brother or sister from your heart. To me, it's one of the most challenging parables in the entire New Testament. It's challenging because Jesus' description of this unforgiving servant is not that he needs to go think about what he's done. Jesus' description is not that, hey, forgiveness might be a growth area for you. Maybe you could read a couple of books on forgiving. He says, you are wicked. He says, you don't understand the heart of the gospel. You're missing the heart of God, and he calls it evil. There is a way in which our unwillingness to forgive is not just robbing us of joy, but it is an affront to God. It is an act of wickedness. But there is also something in here that gives us the key to how we begin to forgive, how we begin to do the work of relational reconciliation. All right, what you see in the text is that if we want to be serious about forgiving other people, we need to learn to get our eyes off of what they did to us, and we need to get our eyes on what Jesus did for us. And I understand that impulse is like, I know, but I just want to get my pound of flesh. And Jesus is like, forget your pound of flesh. I offered you my whole body. You look at what they did, you're like, what they did was so wrong. And Jesus looks back and he goes, yes, it was. It was so wrong that I had to go die. You look at that thing that we can't forgive and just are reminded that somebody already died for that. That the somebody who died was the innocent, sinless Son of God who went to the wood of a cross and died, not just for the sin of the person who has offended us, but who died for our sin. Right? And it can be so easy to want to hold the sin of others over their head, while celebrating the mercy and grace of God that cleanses us and purifies us and washes us. And Jesus says, hey, can you just slow down a little bit? And rather than feeling such vengeance towards them, could you just allow yourself to experience a moment of gratitude where you celebrate how much I have done for you, how much I have forgiven you of? Can you see yourself as the $3 billion sinner? Can we understand ourselves through that lens? forgiven, debt paid, but somehow that makes it easier to let other people off the hook at the same time. Now, that's hard. You're like, wait, but you don't know what they did. I don't. You don't know what they said. I don't. And I'm not condoning it. I'm not excusing it in any way. I'm just saying that the invitation of the gospel is to extend to other people the grace that Jesus has extended to us. That when we have been wronged, we go back to the Beatitudes, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now, in some ways, it's easier when we're the one who has wronged someone else. Yet all harder, all at the same time. I'm not sure which, but verse 23 and 24 turns a corner. It says, so if you are offering your gift on the altar, and there you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, you've done something that's offended somebody else, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled with your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Just in case you thought this whole idea of relational reconciliation was just extra credit Christianity, no, you see the importance of this to God. Right? God sees not just the songs we sing as an act of worship, but he sees the way we treat other people as an act of worship. Right? And God values the way we love other people so much that he is saying, in effect, hey, if you're going to come to me and celebrate everything I've done and worship me and honor me and glorify me, if you want all of that to have some real traction, if you want all of that to have some real meaning, some value, some significance, then could you please go make it right with your brother or sister who you have offended? Will you make that call? Will you make the apology? Will you say, look, when I said that, I was totally wrong. I'm not going to offer you any excuses, any I was sleep deprived, any had been a hard weekend. I was wrong. I'm sorry that I talked to you that way. He's saying, man, if you would go do that, oh, wow, would it supercharge our experience on a Sunday morning? By the way, Jesus is also kind of alluding to the fact that he understands that that conversation can be a really challenging and a really costly conversation. Well, you got to remember, Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mount in Galilee. It's about 80 miles outside of Jerusalem. And he talks here about somebody that is bringing a gift to an altar. Right? Back in the time of Christ, back in the time where the temple was in existence, the only altar where you would bring that kind of gift was in Jerusalem. So what Jesus is envisioning is you loading up your family, getting it all together, getting 80 miles up the road to Jerusalem, probably your conscience bothering you the whole way. You're like, man, I was such a jerk, whatever. Getting there and being like, oh my goodness. Whew. What Jesus would like is for me to leave my gift here, go 80 miles back home, make it right, and come back. Right? I think there's a lot of times where we sort of affirm this teaching in principle, but then say, yeah, but it's just too hard. Like, it would just be too embarrassing for me to, like, call that person from, like, 5 years ago and just say, like, I'm sorry for, like, five years ago. I'm sorry. That just feels too hard. It feels like it would just, like, upset the dynamics in the office in a way that I don't know. Nobody in my firm apologizes. I don't know how that plays out. I don't know what that does if I say I was wrong. I don't know what that does if I say that to my boss. I don't know. Jesus is like, I get it. I get it. Could you just trust me with that, though? I understand that this may be hard, but it's worth it. I understand that it may be hard, but maybe the difficulty is part of what makes it worship. And then he goes back in verse 25 and verse 26 to just add a little more impetus to this work of relational reconciliation. He says, reach a settlement quickly with your adversary while you're on the way with him to court. It's kind of underscoring the fact that in the previous verses when he said, hey, if anybody has anything against you, not just talking about like anybody that's ever been mad at you for any reason at any point in life, because we would all just spend, the entire summer calling, texting, being like, sorry, whatever. He's saying, hey, we're talking about the places where you have legitimately offended somebody, and you are in their debt. You're in their relational debt. There's a need for reconciliation, and you're the cause of that need. Well, you're on your way to court, or your adversary will hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you'll be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out of there until you have paid the last penalty. Right? This is not a verse or two verses about how the Christians engage the legal system. This is Jesus' way of saying, would you resolve the conflict before it gets baked into your relationship? Right? Don't let this thing play out and get all the way and make it all formal, make it a big deal. Try to resolve it as quickly as possible. Right? Ephesians chapter 4, back to that verse. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, and don't give the devil an opportunity. Right? The easiest apology that you will ever make is the fastest apology that you make. Right? We've all been there where you're like, man, I could have just apologized yesterday, but instead I decided to drag it out for a week before I eventually got around to apologizing. Or at least the married people in the room are with me on this one. You're like, oh yeah, that's stupid. Every time we do that. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I know. Just make it right quick, right? Don't drag it out for a whole weekend. Don't waste a whole holiday weekend because you're mad at each other. Just fix it on your way home today and go live in the freedom of the gospel. Right? It's just Jesus being really, really practical. Now, here's the thing. I guess that most of us have some work we need to do in response to this talk. I know I did this week. I had some phone calls that I had to make and some conversations I needed to initiate. I know there are relationships in my life that are going to take some work to repair, some really hard things that I have to deal with my family and other places. And I want to call us to do that work. To not just be like, oh yeah, thank you, good sermon on forgiveness. Like do something with it. It's hard, it's painful. You might have to bring your small group in on it. You might have to have some people walk the journey with you, but do something with it. But can I just end by reminding us how captivating it would be if we could create this kind of culture as a church? Because I'll tell you, particularly if you're brand new around here, if you stay around here or any church long enough, somebody's going to tick you off. And as hard as it might be to believe, at some point you're going to tick somebody off. Like something's going to go relationally wrong. Wouldn't it be amazing if we knew how to repair that? Where it wasn't just like, oops, that was an awkward moment. Oh, time for a new church. Right? There's people that do that all the time. Seriously, oops, that was awkward. New church, new church, new church. Right? Some people are getting ready to take like their second lap back through Restoration City because they've been to every other church in the city. And it's like, well, look, just learn how to fix the thing. But can you imagine if we created that kind of culture, knowing that we live in a city that is characterized by relational fragility? Can you imagine what it'd be like if the word on the street was, man, if you got around a church that takes the gospel seriously, you'd find a couple of resilient relationships. Imagine how attractive that would be to a watching world. Right? I want to fight with you guys to create that kind of community so that others can experience the grace of the gospel. Father, we want to come to you right now and ask you for the grace to live this out. God, we can't do it in our own. We can't do it in our own strength. We can't do it in our own power. So would you, Lord Jesus Christ, give us what we need? Would you please help us to understand how to apply this to the broken relationships in our lives? Lord, show us the places where wisdom would call for us to walk slowly and in community. And God, I do pray, show us the places where we just need to get over ourselves and apologize. Show us the places where we could set something right this afternoon. I ask you to do this, not just for our sake, but for the sake of your glory in this city. And I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's all stand and sing this last song together.